The call came in at 5:47 p.m., 13 minutes before showtime. David Letterman was in his dressing room adjusting his tie in the mirror when his producer burst through the door without knocking. The look on her face told him everything he needed to know before she even spoke. "Michael's not coming," she said, breathless. "Food poisoning. He's at Cedars-Sinai. We have no guest for the second segment." David's hand paused, mid-adjustment. Michael Chen was one of the biggest comedians in the country, riding high on a Netflix special that had gone viral. He was supposed to do 20 minutes. 20 minutes of guaranteed laughs, tested material, safe television. "How long do we have?" David asked, his voice measured. 12 minutes until we're live." In 30 years of television, David had faced every crisis imaginable. Technical failures, controversial guests, breaking news that derailed entire shows, but an empty guest chair with 12 minutes to air. That was a special kind of nightmare. "Options, Reem?" he asked, already moving toward the door. "We've called everyone. Everyone's either out of town or unreachable. We could extend the monologue, do a longer segment with the first guest, maybe." "Maybe isn't a show," David cut her off, not unkindly. He was already walking down the hallway toward the stage, his mind racing through possibilities. The Ed Sullivan Theater was in its pre-show rhythm. The audience was filing in, excited voices creating that particular buzz of anticipation. The band was warming up. Camera operators were checking their equipment, and backstage the crew was moving with practiced efficiency, making sure every element was in place for a show that was now falling apart. That's when David saw her. Elena Rodriguez was standing just off stage, clipboard in hand, directing two stagehands who were adjusting a lighting rig. She wore black pants and a black crew shirt, the unofficial uniform of invisibility in the television industry. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She was speaking into her headset in Spanish, quick and efficient, then switching to English to coordinate with the lighting director. But it wasn't her coordination that caught David's attention. It was the small notebook in her back pocket. As she gestured to the stagehands, the notebook slipped out slightly and David could see handwriting on the exposed page. Even from 15 feet away, he could make out the structure: setup, punchline, tag, joke structure. David had been around comedy long enough to recognize it instantly. It was muscle memory, the way a dancer recognizes choreography or a musician recognizes sheet music. He walked over to her. Elena didn't notice him at first. She was focused on the rig, making sure the angle was perfect. When she finally turned and saw David Letterman standing 3 feet away, her eyes widened. "Mr. Letterman," she said quickly, professionally, "we're almost done here. 2 more minutes." "What's in?" "The notebook?" David asked, pointing. Elena's hand instinctively went to her back pocket, covering it. "Just notes. For work." "Those aren't work notes," David said. "Not accusatory, just observant." "Those are jokes." Elena's face flushed. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. Then something in her shoulders relaxed just slightly. The truth was exhausting to hide. "I write sometimes," she admitted. "Just for myself." "You write jokes for yourself?" David's eyebrow went up. That signature expression that had become iconic. "That's like being a chef who only cooks in the dark. What's the point if nobody eats it?" Elena managed a small smile. "My English isn't good enough. For comedy, I mean." "Your English sounds pretty good to me." "Good enough to move lights, not good enough to make people laugh." David was about to respond when his producer appeared again, more frantic now. "David, 9 minutes." He held up a hand to her, then turned back to Elena. "Where are you from?" "Colombia. Bogota." "And you wrote comedy there?" Elena hesitated. This was the part of her life she'd locked away, the part that made the present bearable and unbearable at the same time. "Yes." "How good were you?" The question hung in the air. Elena could have deflected, could have minimized, could have protected herself with modesty. Instead, she looked David Letterman in the eye and told him the truth. "Good enough to fill El Campín Stadium, 40,000 people." David's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "El Campín, that's the soccer stadium." "Yes." You did stand up in a soccer stadium? 3 times. David turned to his producer, who was hovering anxiously nearby. How much time did you say we needed to fill? 20 minutes, but Elena, David said, still looking at his producer. So can you do 20 minutes in Spanish? Elena's breath caught. What? Now David looked at her. Really looked at her. We have an empty slot. You have material. Can you do 20 minutes of stand-up comedy in Spanish? Mr. Letterman, I'm a stagehand. I'm not. You just told me you filled a soccer stadium 3 times. David's voice was firm but not unkind. That's not a stagehand. That's a comedian who happens to be working backstage. But the audience won't understand Spanish. Some of them will. And the ones who don't will figure it out. Comedy is 50% words and 50% everything else. Timing, physicality, commitment. If you're as good as you say you are, they'll get it. Elena's producer was making frantic gestures, pointing at her watch. 6 minutes. I don't have my material ready, Elena said, but her voice was weakening. David could hear it. The part of her that wanted to say yes was starting to win. You have a notebook full of material right there, David pointed to her pocket, and you have 6 minutes to look it over. That's more prep time than I get for some shows. I can't just go on the Late Show. Why not? David asked simply. Give me one good reason why not. Elena opened her mouth, then closed it. She could think of 100 reasons, but standing there, looking at David Letterman's face, none of them felt real. They all felt like fear wearing different masks. Elena, David said quietly, stepping closer so only she could hear. I've been doing this for 30 years. I can tell the difference between someone who wants to perform and someone who's scared to perform. You don't look scared because you can't do it. You look scared because you can. 5 minutes. Elena pulled the notebook from her pocket. Her hands were shaking. If I do this, if I go out there, you'll either kill or you won't, David said, but you'll know. And not knowing is worse than anything else. Elena looked at the notebook, then at David, then at the stage beyond where the audience was settling in. Somewhere in that audience were people who spoke Spanish. Somewhere in that audience were people who would understand. And even if they didn't, even if she bombed, at least she would have tried. At least she would have been a comedian again, even if only for 20 minutes. Okay, she whispered. Then stronger, okay, I'll do it. David's face broke into a genuine smile. Good, come with me. The next 5 minutes were a blur. David walked Elena to his dressing room. His producer followed, simultaneously on her phone, canceling the backup plan and briefing the control room about the change. David's assistant found Elena a blazer to wear over her crew shirt. Not perfect, but better. Someone from makeup did a quick pass on her face, nothing dramatic, just enough for the lights. Your material, David said as the makeup artist worked. Give me the basic topics. I need to know what you're going to talk about so I can set you up. Elena, sitting in David Letterman's chair while someone applied powder to her face, felt like she was in a dream. I have a bit about being Latina in America. One about my mother thinking I'm an engineer because I work in television. One about dating as an immigrant, and she paused. And, David prompted, one about being invisible, about working backstage. David nodded slowly. That's the one. That's your closer. You haven't even heard it. I don't need to. Trust me. Start with dating, move to your mother, then hit them with the invisibility piece. That's your arc, light to heavy, personal to universal. 2 minutes. They walked to the stage entrance. David's producer was in his ear feeding him notes. The band was playing the opening music. The audience was cheering, and Elena was about to walk onto national television to perform in a language half the audience wouldn't understand. One more thing, David said, just before the music cue. When you're out there, don't perform to the camera. Perform to me. I'll be right there next to you. You make me laugh and they'll laugh, okay? Elena nodded, not trusting her. Voice. Okay, David said. Let's go make some noise. The show opened normally. David did his monologue, hitting his marks, getting his laughs. The first guest was an actress promoting a new movie, charming and professional. The segment went smoothly. Then they cut to commercial. During the break, David turned to the audience. "Folks, we've got something special for you tonight. Our scheduled comedian had to cancel last minute, but we've got something better. One of our crew members is actually a stand-up comedian from Colombia. She's going to perform for you in Spanish. Now, some of you speak Spanish, some of you don't, but I promise you, comedy is comedy in any language. So I want you to give a very warm welcome to Elena Rodriguez." The audience applauded as Elena walked out. The lights hit her, and for a moment, she froze. This wasn't El Campín Stadium. This wasn't Bogota. This was The Late Show with David Letterman. And she was wearing a borrowed blazer over a crew shirt, and she was about to perform in Spanish on American television. Then she saw David, standing stage right, smiling at her. Not the television smile, the real one. She grabbed the microphone, took a breath, and began. "Buenas noches," she said. Her voice was shaky at first. "Mi nombre es Elena, y hace 8 años vine a Estados Unidos para ser famosa." "My name is Elena, and 8 years ago I came to the United States to be famous." She paused. David, understanding nothing, laughed at her timing. The audience, picking up on his cue and her delivery, laughed too. Elena felt something unlock in her chest. "En lugar de eso me convertí en, ¿cómo se dice? Una mujer invisible que mueve luces. Instead, I became, how do you say, an invisible woman who moves lights." More laughter. Some of it from Spanish speakers who understood. Some from people responding to her physicality as she mimed moving equipment. She was warming up now, falling into the rhythm. "Mi madre en Colombia piensa que soy ingeniera. Le digo, mamá, ¿trabajo en televisión?" Ella dice a sus amigas, "Mi hija es ingeniera de televisión." "No, mamá, yo muevo cosas. Si soy ingeniera, entonces el hombre del McDonald's es chef ejecutivo." My mother in Colombia thinks I'm an engineer. I tell her, "Mom, I work in television." She tells her friends, "My daughter is a television engineer." "No, Mom, I move things. If I'm an engineer, then the guy at McDonald's is an executive chef." The audience was fully with her now. David was laughing genuinely, responding to her energy even without understanding the words. She moved into her dating material, physical and expressive, making her meaning clear through gesture and tone even when the words were foreign. 5 minutes in, she switched to English. Not perfect English, but confident English. "You know what is funny? In Colombia, I am famous comedian. Here, I am woman who says, 'Watch your head when light falls down.'" She demonstrated, ducking. Same person, different. Language. Different light. The audience roared. She talked about the American dating apps, about trying to explain Colombian culture to men who thought Bogota was in Mexico. She talked about her mother's phone calls, about the disconnect between who she had been and who she appeared to be. And then, as David had suggested, she moved to the closer. "I want to tell you something true," Elena said, her voice quieter now. "When you work backstage in television, you are invisible. You dress in black, you stay in shadows, you make magic happen, but nobody sees you. For 8 years, I have been invisible." She paused, looking out at the audience. "But invisible is not the same as disappeared. You can see me now, yes, I am here. I was always here. You just had to look." The theater was silent, not the silence of confusion, but the silence of recognition. In Colombia, I stood in front of 40,000 people. Here, I stand in front of no one. But tonight, she gestured to David, to the audience, to the cameras. Tonight, someone looked backstage. Someone said, "You are not invisible. You are comedian. And so I am here." She bowed slightly. "Gracias, thank you for seeing me." The audience exploded. Standing ovation. David walked over and embraced her, and Elena, this woman who had been invisible for 8 years, was seen, truly, completely seen. After the commercial break, David brought Elena back to sit in the guest chair. "That was extraordinary," he said, and his voice was thick with genuine emotion. "How did it feel?" "Like coming home," Elena said simply. "Like remembering who I am." Later, after the show, after the audience had filed out and the crew was breaking down the set, Elena found David in the hallway. "Mr. Letterman," she said, "I don't know how to thank you." "You already did," David said. "You went out there and you killed. That's all the thanks I need." "But why? Why did you take that risk? You didn't know if I'd be good." "Yes, I did," David interrupted. "You told me you filled a soccer stadium. People don't fill soccer stadiums by accident. They do it because they're exceptional. I just gave you a stage small enough to fit on television." Elena laughed, wiping her eyes. "What happens now?" "Now? Now you decide. You can go back to being a stagehand, or you can be a comedian who sometimes works backstage. But Elena, you can't be invisible anymore. Too many people saw you tonight." 3 months later, Elena Rodriguez quit her job at The Late Show. Not bitterly, not dramatically. She gave proper notice, trained her replacement, said goodbye to the crew that had been her family for 8 years. She started performing in clubs around New York. Small venues at first, then bigger ones. She did sets in English and Spanish, sometimes mixing them, creating her own bilingual voice. Word spread. A showcase performance led to a comedy festival invitation. The festival led to a development deal. 2 years after her appearance on The Late Show, Elena released a comedy special on Netflix. It was performed in both English and Spanish, with subtitles that were themselves funny. Critics called it groundbreaking. Audiences called it hilarious. And in Bogota, her mother finally understood that her daughter wasn't an engineer. She was a comedian. She had always been a comedian. David Letterman kept a framed photo from that night in his office. It showed Elena mid-performance, caught in a spotlight, her face alive with joy and confidence. He looked at it sometimes when he was frustrated with the show, with the grind of nightly television. It reminded him why he did this job. Not for the famous guests or the ratings or the awards, but for the moments when something real broke through, when someone who had been invisible became seen, when a borrowed blazer and 20 minutes of faith changed everything. The Late Show hired a new stagehand to replace Elena, a young woman named Sophia who was quiet, efficient, good at her job. One day, David noticed she had a notebook in her back pocket. "What's in the notebook?" he asked. Sophia looked startled. "Just notes." David smiled. "You know, we have a history here of giving chances to people with notebooks. Come find me when you're ready." Because that's what stages are for. Not just for the people who start on them, but for the people who work behind them, who dream in the shadows, who wait for someone to look backstage and say, "I see you. Now show us what you've got." That night, Elena Rodriguez had shown them, and the world had been watching. The stagehand became a comedian, not because she learned perfect English or because she became American or because she stopped being invisible. She became a comedian because someone reminded her that she had always been one. The stage was just waiting for her to return to it. And when she did, she brought every single one of those 8 invisible years with her. Every time she'd moved a light, every time she'd said, "Watch your head," every time she'd written jokes in a notebook she thought no one would ever see. None of it was wasted. It was all material. It was all her story. And that story, told in 2 languages on a night when everything went wrong and somehow went right, reminded everyone watching that the best performances aren't planned. They're discovered, usually in the last place anyone thinks to look. Backstage, in the shadows, in a notebook tucked into someone's back pocket. All you have to do is look,